Hi, this is Barb Crowley, and welcome to Metaphysics, A View Through the Veil. Today we're talking to Tricia Eastman, and she's going to share with us the power of plant medicine and psychedelic journeys for cultivating new beliefs, healing trauma, and accessing latent gifts within us. She's going to talk about the inner alchemy process she calls seeding consciousness, which is also the name of her newest book. Tricia has been privileged to engage with audiences at Stanford University's D.school and the World Economic Forum. She's also on GAIA TV's Psychedelica. She has curated transformative retreats worldwide with plant medicines as well as facilitated psychospiritual programs. Tricia is building a new retreat center, Azores, and it's scheduled to open in 2025. Welcome to the show, Tricia.
Honored to be here. Thank you so much. And one correction I'll share is that things have been delayed a little bit. We're probably going to open in 2026.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's better to be perfect, right?
Yeah. Well, just so that people aren't like, hey, I want to come see you guys at the end of the
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
you know.
So you'll
So,
be opening in 2026 in
yep.
Azores, which is fabulous. So I started to read your book and, I went through your history, but you want to tell the audience how you started into plant medicine?
Mhm.
How
I
plant medicine found you. You said, "Everything finds me, I don't go to it."
Yeah, I mean, there's many starts and stops. If I go back to like the psychedelics, I found that in, high school and college
Right,
and
right.
was doing harm reduction at raves and then um, you know, these horrible dare commercials. It kind of blows my mind that they still use dare, which is the drug, what is it, drug resistance education, I can't remember what the A stands for, as a harm reduction for children and teens for
I didn't
using
know they
drugs, and
still used it, you
they
know?
still use it. There's like
Yeah, it was
nothing
so lame.
out there, but, when I was younger, it was like, "This is your brain on drugs, frying an
Mhm,
egg in a pan," and so I'm thinking, "Wow, these weekends where we're going out and we're taking mushrooms and MDMA is really amazing," but, thinking, "Oh, how many of these free passes do I get before I
mhm.
fry the egg?"
Right,
So to
right.
say. So I stopped, and then,
And you had family history that made you worried, I think. That
yes.
because I remember you saying, "Oh, please don't break my brain."
Oh my god. So my father is, my real birth father is diagnosed, schizophrenic.
Mhm.
And so, he had a break from cannabis. And,
And that's so unusual, really,
yeah,
isn't it?
and he, had an attempted suicide
Mm,
as a result of it. And it was when I was in my 20s. And so I kind of helped him through that situation. And it definitely made me concerned for myself. So here I am. I had a traumatic brain injury. And if you know a lot about TBIs, which I've learned so much over the last decade, that when you have a brain injury, which, is so easy to do, you can get it from just being tapped when you're rear ended by a car in a car accident because,
wow.
you've got this, little thing of jello in your head. It's made of fat and you just bounced around in the wrong way and it can really affect your brain. So I've seen people who have had complete personality changes, like people who were like
Wow.
really nice people who became just like a completely different person. I wasn't on that spectrum in my traumatic brain injury, but what happened for me was it created a massive amount of anxiety. And I actually had a breakdown, not like an actual breakdown in the sense that I had a breakdown, but I had
Mhm.
it internally and I was heavily masking it to the world. So
Right.
it was like literally like being in front of a group of people. not being able to actually, like, put out a sentence
Yeah.
and, not knowing it was because I injured my brain and thinking, "What's wrong with me?" And,
And how did
luckily
you did I miss that? How did you have a brain injury?
so I was in Las Vegas. This was in, it was, like, when I was 28. I'm 44 now. And I was at my cousin's house who, is like my dear cousin Shelly. And I plopped down on her couch and I didn't realize that there was like a bar in between the couch. And so I smacked my head on the back of this bar and it literally made such a loud crack that the dog came up to me and was like licking me because it could tell that I was
Wow.
in so much pain. And, I literally got up the next morning, went to this meeting, and it was with, I was at the time doing wellness consulting and I worked with like Ritz-Carlton Hotel Group and a lot of other like high-end like spa brands. And I literally get into the meeting and I can't even like put out a sentence and, like, my whole
Wow.
nervous system is a mess, and I was with my team, I was with the CEO of the company that I was
Mm.
working with, and I was, like, absolutely mortified. I mean, like, so I added additional trauma to the trauma itself in that
Right.
I didn't even it's like trying to drive a car that has no engine in it and or, that isn't operational, but not knowing that it's not operational and,
God,
like,
that must have been terrifying.
it was terrifying, and so I'm just, like, in this panic, and I'm like, "I can never have this happen again." I go to the
Mhm.
doctor, I get a prescription for benzodiazepines to, like,
Okay,
because I
what is that? Benzos, I remember
like
hearing.
Xanax for
Ah,
anxiety because I was like, "Oh
yeah.
my god, I
Oh,
can't."
so he gave you something for anxiety, but not for the brain injury.
I didn't know I had a
Oh,
brain injury, I hadn't made the connection.
yeah.
And so, then I just it kept getting worse and worse, and I just wanted relief from the suffering of the anxiety. So, I remembered that I went to raves and would just have these incredible unifying experiences on MDMA.
Right.
So I, started taking MDMA again, and it was, maybe, like, over a few months, I was probably taking it, like, every weekend or every other weekend,
Mhm.
and I was drinking a lot of alcohol too at the time to
Right.
kind of mask the anxiety,
Right.
which was not
Self-medicating.
self-medicating.
Self-medicating. Yeah.
Um, and, I did have this really crazy mystical experience where maybe it was the 12th time or somewhere in there where, all of a sudden I had this vision and it felt like either an archangel or my higher self, and it said, "You're not on the right path."
Mhm.
Like, "You're a very loving, giving person, but you're not living your true life, your authentic life, and it's time to go find yourself."
Wow.
So, I literally woke up the next day with, like, complete resolve. I tell my husband, I say, at the time, I was working really hard. I owned, like, 4 houses. That was, like, my retirement. I was only
Yeah.
28. I was
I
like
was gonna say,
I was like a
retirement.
really, like, ambitious person.
Mhm.
And,
Type A, huh?
yeah, like, type A. And I said, "I wanna sell everything. I wanna travel for at least a year, take a sabbatical, figure out, what next?"
Mhm.
And he said to me, "I can't see that happening for at least 5 years." So, I decided to leave him
Wow.
as a result. It was
So
like
you were going with or without him?
yeah, I had to because all that anxiety, everything like, I went to 2 different psychotherapists. One of the psychotherapists who's, like, a cognitive behavioral therapist, one of the top therapists at the University of Washington said to me, "You're like a breed of Chihuahua." Like how certain breeds have certain dispositions. He
Mhm.
was like Like, he basically compared me to, like, a little anxious chihuahua,
Yeah.
and I'm, like, thinking, "You mean I have to be like this for the rest
Yeah.
of my life?" So at
Mhm.
that point, when I had this, like, glimmer of hope where I was like, "Oh, the reason I'm experiencing this is because I need to go find myself," and then my husband saying, "No, I don't support that." I'm like, "Sorry, I'm out of here."
Right.
So yeah, that was really confusing for my family. That was really, confusing for a lot of people. And honestly, like I always tell people with psychedelic experiences, give yourself time to integrate before you make any major life changes. I
Mhm.
definitely threw the baby away with the bathwater on
Yeah.
that. And it was interesting because I went on this journey. I traveled to Europe. I lived in Europe for almost a year. And in the process was getting really clear intuitive messages, like really having mystical experiences without even taking psychedelics. I was doing
Right.
some like
Right.
kundalini breath work, which definitely can activate like your endogenous DMT in your body. So technically, you could consider that taking psychedelics, but I didn't know I was doing that. And I was just getting a lot of guidance on, who I am, what my purpose is, what I'm here to do, but still very new, still very liminal in putting those pieces together. And
Mhm.
then I read this book called Plant Spirit Medicine by Pam Grout. I think it was Pam Grout. Um, and it talked about all the plants and how they have spirits
Mhm.
and like how to commune with those spirits and how to create a relationship. And one of the plants in the book that it talked about was this plant ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And it said, "Oh, you have to go to the jungles of Peru or Brazil to experience this, and this is how it's practiced, and this is kind of what the essence of the spirit of this plant is, and what kind of healing it brings." And I was like captivated. I was like, "I need to meet this plant," but I also was like not willing to like go by myself to the
Mhm.
middle of the jungle and try to find
That would
ayahuasca.
have been pretty frightening, yeah, to
Yeah,
do that on your own.
and then interestingly, like several months later, I got invited to an ayahuasca ceremony, and I
What
had no
country were
idea.
you in? You
In
said
Hollywood, California.
oh, really? Because I thought you were in Europe when you, uh but California makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah, so after, I came back from Europe, I was in California and just, like, you know, spent a lot of time in California traveling for work, but I never lived there, and I was in California, I was actually at this really cool place called Cafe Gratitude, have you heard of it?
No.
It's
But I
it was
want to.
It's like this place that is really intentionally designed that was designed around, like, the idea of gratitude and bringing gratitude into your life, so all of the dishes are, intentions, and the server comes up to you, and the first thing they ask you is, "What are you grateful for today?"
Wow.
So, it's a really like, it's got a magical kind of alchemical container 'cause it attracts magical people, so I'm literally sitting outside and this group of new people that I've just met is saying that they're gonna do an ayahuasca ceremony in the mountains of Hollywood Hills,
Right.
and they invite me.
Mhm.
And so I said yes. And, interestingly, it was a, curandera from, Ecuador,
Mhm.
and, so it was like an authentic ayahuasquero, not some person who took an online course or anything like
Right,
that, which
that's
there
what you
are.
worry about kind of with that,
Yeah, especially in the Hollywood Hills, but it was a little
especially.
was a little comical because there was a lot of celebrities in this ceremony, and it was, like, my first experience, and so that was kind of interesting being in that kind of environment, and, it really opened my eyes that, these medicines, can help you and heal you versus, the dare idea of, these things being toxic and hurting your
Oh,
brain,
yeah. Yeah.
all of this. And,
But how
late
was your first trip, let's say?
so it was really interesting because, I feel like when you work with psychedelics, it connects you. There's several phases. The first is the purging phase where you feel discomfort, you release a lot of trauma out of the body. I definitely experienced that with ayahuasca. It's very common to purge. Most people
Mhm.
think that's really horrible. Have you
I
done
I
ayahuasca?
have not, and I didn't do it because I didn't wanna throw up. That's what it is. Now but then I went and did mushrooms, and I used to do mushrooms all the time, and
Yeah.
we'd cook them into a big spaghetti dinner with mushroom sauce, and would have a wonderful time. And this time, actually, I did the hero's journey, and I did the
Oh,
5 gram,
oh.
and I threw up, and it's like, I don't wanna do a drug that I throw up, but I did, but it was still good. It was very good.
So
Yeah.
in the indigenous way of thinking, and this spans across like peyote in the Lakota tradition, ayahuasca in many of the different lineages like Shipibo or the equatorial Ecuador lineages or even Iboga, the idea of purging is getting well because if
Mhm.
something's coming out, what it's doing is it's purging toxins and
Yeah.
parasites and bad energy. And I find many times, even though like the feeling leading up to it, which is usually feeling nauseous and uncomfortable, the
Mhm.
feeling of release afterwards feels so pleasurable. Like that
Yeah,
feel. I mean,
yeah.
did you feel good after you purged?
I threw up a lot. It was a lot more than physical. It was a
Okay.
lot it was a lot of, psychic and psychological,
Yeah.
is really what it was for me. And then I was just so spent. So I held
Mhm.
off because I didn't wanna give up any of the plant. That was
Mhm.
my thinking, so I held off almost the whole time until the end, and then I
Yeah.
let it go, and it happened anyway. I couldn't hold on, maybe that was it more. But I didn't wanna give up any of the plant. It was like, "Oh, if I throw up, then I won't I'll be letting go of the plant.
Yeah.
I won't have the full effect." And that really was the wrong thinking,
Yeah. Because you
but
absorb it fast.
mhm, yeah. But, I mean, it was an amazing experience, amazing. And we'll talk about the intentions and
Yeah.
the Negra, I think I'm saying it wrong.
Negredo, which is
Yes,
like
yeah,
the
all
inner
of that,
alchemy
yeah.
process.
So my intention was actually to get rid of something that, I thought was a block and an energy in me.
Mhm.
So it was very deliberate going into it,
Yep.
and I did. I mean, I think that's quite a bit of what the purge was about,
Yeah.
and it actually, it came from I could see when it came into my spiritual body,
Mhm.
put it that way, because it came in more around the Civil War, and it's been with me through
Mhm.
lifetimes.
Like
And
past life stuff
yeah,
and
it was past life, it
ancestral.
came to me, and it stayed with my spirit, which is an interesting thing for me that you don't
Mm.
purge it in between lives, but this
Mhm.
one I didn't, and it took a 5-gram mushroom trip.
To get it out
To
of your
get yeah,
system.
and I had tried everything. I had tried John of God, I had
Mhm.
tried everything, and,
Yeah.
it was the mushrooms that did it.
Yeah, and the way I see that specifically, because first off, you had the spiritual wisdom, you had the
Mhm.
understanding that there was something there.
Yeah.
You don't just take the mushrooms, and sometimes it does flush out things that you aren't necessarily intentionally trying to get rid of, but usually it's when you give direction to, like, hey, I want to really work on this, that it can
Mhm.
go in and it's like almost like spiritual Drano. It can unclog whatever's like
It can.
clogging up, all
Yeah.
that stuff. And, one thing I'll say is that when you look at like energy medicine in itself, it can work on the subtle body. It can pull out implants and attachments. And then I feel like there's different somatic modalities that are really powerful because we store a lot of trauma in our body.
Mhm.
But then there's different layers. And I feel like the psychedelics are able to get into some of the layers that these other modalities aren't able to get into. So it's an important tool in the toolkit. I don't think that
Yeah.
one should rely on one thing versus another, but I feel like it's kind of like, in my laundry room, I have different solutions for getting different stains out of
Mhm.
my clothing. And
Right.
it's the same thing as a spiritual healer. You have like this massive kit of all these different tools. And yeah, it really depends on, where it's stuck, to
Mhm.
what psychedelic to use, how much of it to take. Taking
Yeah.
5
Yeah.
grams
Yeah.
is a
That was
pretty big dose,
it
and
was huge, and I
so
had a
you needed
sitter, I
that.
had somebody come and bring me through it, and we did quite a bit of work before we actually I
Yeah.
even took the mushroom,
You were
so
prepared, you were ready to
oh,
let it
very much
go.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Your soul
Oh,
was
yeah.
like your soul was like,
We're
"Okay,
doing
this
it.
is it. We're doing it."
Yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was very different from my mushroom sauce days. It was
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think with, like, lower doses of psilocybin that a lot of times it just can, because it gets processed through the liver, and the
Mhm.
liver is where we store a lot of anger, so it kind of, like, shakes up the snow globe, but it
Yeah.
doesn't, like, have enough push to, like, push all the stuff out, so it's almost like the baby getting stuck in the birth canal in your
Yeah.
rebirth process.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
like, people I feel like suffer more on low doses,
Mhm,
as where I find, like, if you take higher doses in a facilitated environment with people that understand the healing technologies that work alongside. And there's ways you can work with the psilocybin, like lemon teching, where you put lemon juice and you
mhm.
heat up the mushrooms. You can even filter out like you can take a coffee grinder and grind up the mushrooms.
We did
And then,
all of it. We did
yes,
it ceremonially. So was that right?
yeah,
Ceremonially.
yeah, exactly. And when you do all that stuff, you don't get as sick, and it's so much
Mhm.
easier for you like, you were worried about, "Did I absorb the medicine? I don't wanna purge it up."
Yeah.
If you're
I
doing
didn't wanna
it
give
in
it
the
up. I
tea,
wanted it. Yeah.
yeah, you
Yeah.
you absorb that within the
Mhm.
first 30 minutes. Like, if someone
Right.
feels like they're gonna throw up, like, right away, a lot of times it's like a subconscious, it can be a subconscious rejection of the medicine itself.
Mhm.
I've seen that also with people with, like, eating disorders where they just kind of
Yeah.
have this, like, purging something that's good for them, rejecting it. In those kind of circumstances, which you always know when that's the case, you're like, "Hey, try to hold it down." But usually in any other
Mhm.
circumstance, you're just like, "No, get it out," because those mushrooms, they're like the scrubbing bubbles in, the little
Yeah.
commercial. They're
Yeah.
absorbing all the bad stuff, and they're
Mhm.
literally, like, taking it out with their little sponges,
Right.
out of your body.
I think this was more I think there was some physical, but I think it was
Mm,
more, psychological, spiritual. I think it really was, um, the face to face with this block and I think I actually had to hold on to it until we got to the battle. You know?
yeah,
That kind of thing, and we're finally got expelled. That's
yeah,
really the way I take it. For me, you know?
yeah. And that goes into the idea of inner alchemy, which is, like you were talking about the Negredo. The
Mhm.
Negredo was that trauma that you had.
Yeah. Yeah.
And whatever obstacles we're facing, but it's the crude oil that alchemically turns to gold. It's actually the fuel for our spiritual journey, so we need that energy, we need to process it, but it's through the albedo is this energy of the moon. It's the tapping into the intuitive, doing the spiritual work, and every single piece of trauma, like, it's almost like, you're like Sherlock Holmes. You're like, "What's it smell like? What's it taste like? Where'd it come from? Is it this
Mhm.
lifetime?" And it's like, the more that you pay attention to it, it's almost like all those questions are a form of love, and
Yeah.
it's like the more that you're, like, holding it and you're like, "Oh, I wanna get to know you. I'm
Mhm.
rejecting you. You're not exiled." And then all of a sudden, it goes and it's transformed, and for you, it was a purge or a
Yeah.
few
Yeah.
purges,
Uh-huh.
and it was ready to go, and then it was, transmuted into light, into a more openness of your heart, into a deeper
Mhm.
connection to yourself and your soul. And then from there is the rubedo. The rubedo is, how do we respond with this trauma? Like how do we move forward? For you, what came through was, and it's multiple things, but one was, it's time to journey with this medicine, and it's time, for the
Mhm.
first time you were like really clear, I need to take 5 grams
Yeah.
and work with a facilitator, and you did, and then that
Mhm.
purging moved it forward, and then from there now you're in this new open space of possibility.
Yeah, exactly. And now I wanna go back to the mushroom dinners,
Mm.
of laughter, the
Yes.
lower key. And nobody ever cooks them now, and we used to cook
Yeah.
them, and it was so much more gentle that way, it seemed like.
Mhm.
And then I haven't gone back and cooked them to try it out, but, it's on my to-do list, to get them again, but cook them up into the, spaghetti sauce and have the spaghetti dinner and see how it is.
Yeah,
And
like
it's
in
such a wonderful,
mm,
um God, doing it that way, it is such a wonderful, benevolent,
mhm.
enjoyable of everything,
Yeah.
way. But, of course, I'm going in with that intention too. A
Yeah.
big spaghetti dinner with all friends, so I'm going in with that intention. Very different from the when I went in with the intention of removing that block, you know?
Well, it's so interesting that you bring this up, because I feel like this opens the field of curiosity and the topic of um sacramental use of mushrooms. And, when we look at the understanding of, there's, kind of the individual, what I call initiatic dose, the hero's dose. But that same
Yeah.
initiatic dose, it's you going into yourself, doing work. But if
Mhm.
you look at different indigenous traditions, and even if you look at the idea of microdosing,
Right.
um,
And I
it's,
did some of that for a while. That's a lot of maintenance. I couldn't keep
yeah.
up. Yeah.
Well, it's great for the brain, it's
Yeah.
great for
No, it's great in many ways,
neuroplasticity.
but I couldn't keep up with, am I on or off today?
Yeah. Well, the way I see it is that, when you look at different types of indigenous relationship with the plants, it
Mhm.
goes back to that book, Plant Spirit Medicine, which is that these plants have a spirit. Once
Yeah.
you partake in psilocybin, it's part of your squad. It's one of your angels, it's one of your
Mhm.
guides. But also, like, the way that we connect to that spirit is through the microdosing. And there's ways of doing it. One way of doing it is, kind of similar. I hate to use the term, I'm not trying to appropriate any terms of any traditions, but in Shipibo, typically you work with a plant for a period of a month to 3 months on a daily basis. You refrain from other activities such as sexual activities, or, eating rich foods. There's like a
Mhm.
very specific diet that you take, and then you work with a specific plant. And usually it's prescribed to you based on your intention. So what you can do, and this is very similar with microdosing, is you can work with psilocybin for a month. You can
Right.
say, I want to have a gentle journey. I want to connect with the spirit of this plant, work with it for a month, take a month off. There's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with that unless you have some predisposed heart condition, liver condition, kidney condition. But other than that, having a relationship to the subtle energy of these plants, you don't have to worry, oh, am I on day 1 or am I on day 3? These
Right.
are just ways of giving the body rest, but there's honestly no scientific evidence. It's just this really cool guy who I really enjoy, James Fadman, decided that this is how you microdose with LSD and mushrooms. And he said, "This is a protocol." And then Paul Stamets made a protocol, but
Right.
these are not scientific protocols. The
Mhm.
indigenous
Now,
people.
I understand it more on the mushroom where your body my understanding or my belief was
Yeah.
that your body kinda gets used to it. So you wanna go on and off, so your body's doesn't get used to it, I guess, you know? So you can take the same dose and it doesn't get used to it. But with LSD, I don't know as much about LSD.
Mhm.
I was given some to microdose at one
Mhm.
point, um, but I don't think I think I did double the amount and didn't microdose.
No, no, that's easy to do with LSD.
Yeah,
Really
and what I
easy.
was trying to do was really, like, take, window pane and cut it up, and that's how I was trying to do it, and I don't think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with LSD, I mean, it is a synthetic. It definitely is a little bit like taxing on the kidneys. Like, I do feel a little strain on my adrenals from
Mhm.
it, which you can take Chinese herbs like ashwagandha, which tonify the adrenals to kind of compensate for that. Which is basically the concept behind the Paul Stamets stack. You know, he's mixing psilocybin with lion's mane, which is an
Right.
adaptogen. I think that the 2 go in hand really well, and I think it's a brilliant, way of looking at things and really kind of similar to the way that you might see in, like, the Shipibo tradition where, ayahuasca is being combined with other plants, not necessarily symbiotically, but they serve a function, and so the function being, the adaptogens are compensating maybe for some of the strain in the
Mhm.
body. So,
Yeah.
I think that's fine, but you can take it every day, um, you just wanna be careful. I always say, learn to trust yourself, learn to
Mhm.
trust your own intuition, learn to feel your body. Like if you're having a daily practice, you're waking up, you're feeling, maybe you have that microdose sitting on your altar as you're opening your morning, and you're really feeling in, is today the day that I
Mhm.
take a microdose? And then what's beautiful about that is you've actually created a relationship with yourself and the
Yeah.
medicine.
Yeah. And I've read, books, there was a book and I read it a long time ago, so I might botch the name, and it was like A Normal Day was the name of the book, A
Oh,
Normal Day. You
yes.
know that one?
Yeah,
It
and it's about a
mm,
woman who wrote her story, and she microdosed LSD, I think,
yeah,
every day for, like, was it a year?
I think so, yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and it was and before that, she had anxiety, she couldn't function, she couldn't focus,
yep,
and what it gave her was a normal day. And
yeah.
and that's what I remember reading, but I have to say, I have never taken LSD with intention, other than to
Mhm,
have a good time. You know?
mm.
And that is, after having done it with mushrooms, it's like, "Oh, I think I wanna go back and try it with LSD, at least." But tell me about some of the other plant medicines, I'm not so familiar with them.
So, I mean, there's so many medicines that you can work with intentionally, and they're not necessarily illegal.
Mhm,
For example, cacao. Cacao is a sacrament in my ancestral lineage, very prevalently used in the Mayan tradition. And when you work with really good ceremonial cacao, it's such a deep heart opener, and you can work with it every day. And, it's got natural theobromine in it. And that can even in itself be an incredible sacrament for microdosing. LSD, in my opinion, I like it for focus. I
mhm,
honestly think they should ban Adderall for children and start microdosing them on LSD. Just
right,
get, some kind of I actually think there would be a combination of different things combined together, like other particular um nootropics as well as adaptogens. But I would say if we wanted to just say a blanket thing that could be super supportive, because I feel like there's so many people in the Silicon Valley tech industry that are abusing Ritalin. There are
mhm,
a lot of children abusing Ritalin. And I feel like LSD really is supportive for mental focus, for clarity. I do feel, especially for people that have really busy lives, what it does is it kind of helps to shut off a lot of the noise. So I could see this woman who had the children, who, wrote the book that you were talking about.
Yeah.
It kind of like cleared her mind so it wasn't so busy and
Mhm.
noisy. And because of that, she was able to connect with gratitude. And I feel like
Yeah.
in the chaotic world that we live in today, and in this world where we're really lacking in connection, and so we reach for our cell phones and we reach for all of these other things,
Mhm.
including drugs and food, and some people even pornography,
Yeah.
to feel. I feel like the microdosing can be a really helpful practice. And when you think about also the plus and the minus, if you have someone who is, let's say, in sex addiction, and they want to intentionally transform that behavior, they can take LSD. They can use their intention, and they can really, in that intention every day, make a ceremonial practice where they're like, I really want to transform this. Now, there may be some deeper trauma in there, just like what you purged out in your 5-gram mushroom
Right.
ceremony, but I
Yeah.
trust that the medicine will guide you on the path to find the healing tools, and that's the one beauty of all medicine, whether you're taking a microdose or a heroic dose. It's not just the medicine itself that's bringing you healing or doing something specific within the body, but it's also helping open the channel so that you can receive the information of, like, what are the next steps to heal
Mhm.
myself?
Right. And where is the ego death? I'm
The
bringing you.
ego death.
Yeah.
Ah, so, I really believe that there's many different types of ego death that we experience. Are you asking specifically about the ego death in the psychedelic experience, or the collective ego death that we're all going through right now? Or
Oh, yeah, I guess both. Well, let
yeah.
me back up. Is there or is you know, for somebody who has done psychedelics,
Mm.
sometimes you can look out into this world and think, maybe it's in the water.
Yeah,
Maybe it is happening and we are all on psychedelics right now because it is so crazy. It
it
is so
is.
wild out there. But, so is there a planetary ego death going on, as well as ego death as you talked about in your book where,
Ye
when you do a personal journey?
Yeah, I mean, to start, I'll talk about the ego death.
Mhm.
So, you talk a lot about, like, chakras and kundalini and that kinda
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
I
yeah,
figure. So
we
your
do.
audience is pretty, it's not gonna be weird if I some
No, not at all,
podcasts,
no, if
I
they're
talk about
listening,
this.
they're hearing this, yeah,
So
yeah.
think of it this way, when you take a psychedelic, what it essentially does is it fully it opens your chakras to your highest aperture, which
Mhm.
is essentially, depending on the psychedelic and depending on the dosage, but it essentially opens you in that aperture, which is your highest expression of yourself. So, like, I love systems like the gene keys. Are you familiar with, like, human design gene keys, which are
I'm
based on.
not. I've heard about it, but I'm not really familiar, so if you wanna expand, that'd be great.
So, like, I love archetypal mapping. I feel like astrology is really incredible. And I think it was Stan Groff that said that he believes that the future of psychedelic therapy is going to be astrology mapping into psychedelic states, because the visions that we have in the subconscious mind, which is what, gets initiated by having, a psychedelic experience, those are activating those different archetypes. And then if you don't have an understanding of those things, it's very hard to, make sense of the experience. So these things are sense making tools. So in the
Is this also
cosmology,
the geometrics that I saw?
the geometry is
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
it. Yes,
yeah.
so it's the geometry, but it's also, like, the right brain, which is all of the kind of, like, symbolic mind, and that can show up in colors and feelings and, I mean, I've heard of people having journeys where, they saw a Ferris wheel with a bunch of crabs on it and they were, had cancer and they were trying to figure it out. And in astrology, the crab represents cancer. And so it's like,
Wow.
like dream interpretation, which I talk about in my book, but I talk about it loosely because I feel like people can get very, like, stuck in these definitions, and I feel like what's most meaningful is your subconscious is trying to play Pictionary with you.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so when it draws the little stick man holding the torch, what
Mhm.
what do you think it's trying to say to you specifically? What meaning does that have to you? Having a context of what fire represents, and maybe the stick man represents the emaciation of culture, an undernourished person who's like conquering the world, who's like out there like with his fire, but like not healthy, or maybe it's representing an aspect of yourself, or maybe it's representing, I mean, it could be a lot of things. So, it's like understanding how to create that relationship with your own subconscious, and
And
then
during a journey, you can actually
and
ask
you can
them,
ask
who
that.
yeah, "Who are you? What are you telling me?" Yeah,
Exactly. Yes,
that's the
thank you
best
for
part.
adding that. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, and not always do, we get to engage in that way, but a lot of times we have, that gift. So going back to human design and gene keys, it's a
Mhm,
map based on the I Ching, which is essentially the 64 archetypes. In the mapping of the gene keys, each one has a shadow, a
mm,
gift, and a city. So imagine that you are an amalgamation of light that is an expression of these archetypes. And these archetypes essentially break down into 64. And then within those 64, each one has three different modes of operation, like, and it's not even that there's 3 modes, it's like a spectrum, and they would fall within those 3 modes, and the first mode is the shadow of it. So
mhm,
all of our shadows are, let's say it's like the sex addiction that I was just talking about. It's connected to some gift. So the middle frequency is the gift. But then the highest frequency is called Siddhic frequency, and that's like the enlightened masters, levitation, omnipresence, like all of these different, there's 64 different archetypal superpowers that we have, the ability to be telepathic. When we think about intuition breaks down into a whole spectrum of clairsentience, clairaudience, all of these different things, and these
yeah,
are
yeah,
all Siddhic superpowers, which is kind of cool. And so when we take psychedelics, what happens is we open up the chakras to where they start to touch into that spectrum of these different Siddhic levels. So we're able to really have a direct conversation with our soul, a direct conversation with our guides, and just get like deep transmissions of truth. And
mhm,
so the way it works is you first take the psychedelic, you start to feel really sick because as these chakras are opening up, all the toxins, all the emotional debris, all that stuff is just like flooding out of the body. You're like shaking. It's very common, just like animals when they're in trauma after they've been chased by a predator, they shake the trauma out
mhm,
of their nervous system immediately. So you see a lot of that shaking, a lot of discomfort. You almost feel like sometimes like tension, like almost like your head's in a vice, or like tension in your entire body. And so that's where like that firepower in your root chakra is starting to travel up through the chakras. As it's traveling, as the chakras are opening, you're like bumping into that stuff, which is stored in the chakras. Your traumas are in the chakras, they're
mhm,
also in the physical body. So as you're bumping into that, you might feel the emotion of fear, you might feel the emotion of shame, you might feel the emotion of grief. And these are part of that purging process. So all these layers are starting to open and come off. So by the time that you've gone through this process, and this could be from taking the substance to, maybe your onset is 30 minutes to 90 minutes into the journey. When did you start purging?
at the end, 7 hours or whatever.
7 hours
Yeah.
later. So so typically, let's say you could be purging the whole time if that's what you need, if, like,
Mhm.
those chakras are so,
Unfortunately, I
clogged up.
enough. It was like, "No, I'm keeping this. I chose to do this. I want it. I'm not giving it up."
You didn't
I
you
know.
you weren't ready to let it go, and this is
Right.
why in initiatic cultures, like, if you look at the Eleusis mystery schools, they spent long amounts of time doing purification rituals, and
Mhm.
that could have been anything from bathing rituals to taking plants that are purgative before doing an
Yeah.
initiation to confessional rituals, which we actually do in Bwiti, which are really around kind of like forgiveness and releasing of things that we're holding on to. And what that does is it cleans those channels so that when you take the mushrooms at five
Mhm.
grams, you're not having to like go through that entire process because you've already cleared a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff out of the
Yeah.
way. Because in an initiation, the goal is to have a mystical experience. It's like a
Mhm.
vision quest. You want to have the mystical vision. So you've gone through this purging process. Your Kundalini has risen up to essentially the solar plexus chakra. That's why a lot of people purge. We have a lot of stuff in that gut chakra.
Mhm.
That's your sense of self. That's your inner child. I mean, the
Yeah.
chakras.
And it's not
Um,
only this lifetime, as was
all
in my case,
lifetimes.
it was, yeah, past lifetimes.
And so
Things were coming up.
yeah, so you're literally purging out for your ancestors, you're purging out for your past lives. And then once you get past that stage of purging, you start to get into the heart. And that's like Buddhic
Mhm.
consciousness. You're literally going through the realms like we talk about, the astral realm, or we talk about 5D consciousness. Literally,
Yeah.
this is the idea of traveling through the chakras, which you are a micro of the macro. You are, if you look at it from in the cosmology of the universe, once you've gotten past the solar system, then you're past our solar system and you're into these higher realms of consciousness. So you've gotten into fourth dimensional consciousness, which is the Buddhic
Yeah.
consciousness of the heart, fifth dimensional consciousness, which is connected with the throat, so on, so forth, on up to, the crown, which is complete non duality. Very
Mhm.
few psychedelics can get you to that point. There is one, which is it is the ingredient that is endogenous to our body. It's what we make in our pineal gland, which is the 5-MeO DMT. And
Oh.
that's the only one. I mean, you can get into high states of consciousness with psilocybin, but typically I find with psilocybin as well as other things like ayahuasca, because they contain the NNDMT, they typically tend to be more like astral realm,
Mhm.
you know, which is like the realm of potential. So it's like you're working essentially to clear your karma so that something doesn't manifest, into
Oh,
this
yeah.
physical
Yeah.
realm in your life, which could be illness or a particular timeline that you maybe would not want to
Right.
manifest. So you're working with that realm of potentials. But with 5-MeO, you're literally completely dissolving into white. You're not
And
white light.
what is that, drug? I had never seen it before, or heard of it really.
So it became popularized. I mean, it's been used in many different indigenous cultures for thousands of years. There's been many archaeological digs that have found medicine bags with things like yopo seeds, which contain 5-MeO DMT, and has been used in different tribes in snuffs. But more commonly, a resurgence came upon the discovery of a toad in the Sonoran
Okay,
Deserts.
then I know. Yeah,
Bufo
okay.
alvarius,
Yeah.
and the venom, it contains 5-MeO DMT, but what's interesting is that when you look at 5-MeO DMT, um it's endogenous to the body, and these toads are in a state of meditation underground for 9 months out of the year. So they
Wow.
burrow underground in the desert. They're in this state of meditation. So literally, they have alchemically produced this 5-MeO DMT in their glands, and that's what is essentially released. Typically, if a predator attacks it for protection, however, it was discovered that when this is dried and smoked, that it creates a complete non-dual experience. And
Wow.
studies have been done on monks and, longtime meditators. There was one done on the University of Wisconsin. And when you measure the brainwave frequency of these meditators and you compare it to somebody who's smoked 5-MeO-DMT, it's exactly the same.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Talk about getting a pill for it and not putting in the work. Yeah.
Well, it's not gonna change your daily frame of how you operate, which I feel like, practice is what builds and fortifies that. But it's going to change the ceiling that you
Mhm.
have. So if you smoke 5-MeO-DMT one time and you have a non-dual state, if you go back and meditate, you're going to have
Mhm.
completely different experiences. And a lot of people struggle with meditation. I
Yeah.
wouldn't call it cheating, but I would say that, I found that a lot of people, especially if they have a lot of trauma, it takes them many years of meditation before they're able to really fully drop into that open state that these monks would, just be able to
Mhm.
drop into almost instantaneously. So I do feel that it's a really helpful tool for people to enhance their spiritual practices and to see the benefit of continuing to do them.
How do you know? Because you work with so many people and you use all of these tools. How do
Mhm.
you know which is right for whom, for the person?
I mean, I like to think of it as like all the years of experience definitely makes a huge difference. And really understanding the individual and what they're working on.
Mhm.
Like for example, you come to me, you have some very specific traumas. It's related to your relationship with your mother. There's
Mhm.
specific psychedelics that are more connected to the essence of the mother. There's more certain psychedelics that are more connected to the essence of the father. Iboga is connected to the father. All of the mescaline family, which is like peyote and San Pedro, are connected to the father. So one of the deepest healing that you can have as a support in doing your own inner work is imagine, you had a really abusive father that didn't love you, that didn't hug you, that didn't see you, then, like taking San Pedro and feeling that presence of the father, just even that holding of that, can be really powerful in assisting that healing process of the things that are missing from your inner template that really, kind of prevent you from being your authentic self, because you never felt supported, you didn't feel seen and loved by the masculine. It just
Mhm.
gives you a different sense of wholeness. So it's like looking at what are the missing ingredients essentially, and like what modalities and medicines and dosages can um, help support that.
And if you don't know the trauma, if you're coming in and it's like, "Well, I wanna experience, but I don't know the trauma." So you
Mhm.
don't really know the intention other than healing,
Yeah.
general healing. Then what happened?
I mean, I think that, the medicines do call you. Like I've even said to people like they're like, "I don't know if 5-MeO is the medicine I should take." And then I said, "Well, ask for signs."
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden all these conversations specifically and news articles and different things were popping up and kind of showing that that might potentially be the thing. So I
Yeah.
just would like really listen. And, I really believe that the thing that the skill that we need in our modern society more than anything else is learning how to work with our intuition and trust ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I try to empower individuals to really have the information and be able to make that choice
Yeah.
of what, you know, and obviously, if I think something's going to be really bad, like Iboga is the most intense medicine on
That's
the
what you
planet.
said in your book, and I'm not familiar with that medicine at all.
It's the Mount Everest of psychedelics, and it's long, grueling journey. Um, but some people have to do it. There's
Mhm.
certain things that you're just not gonna get to the kind of trauma like, I just had such a backlog of trauma that I inherited from my lineage. I mean, my poor father, the reason he is schizophrenic is because of that backlog of, like, just horrendous trauma that he I mean, I know what created that break within him, and I feel for him. And so but I also, you know, he's like kind of incapacitated in the sense of really being able to do the spiritual work to kind of clear that.
Yeah.
So, you know, me and my sister, I have actually three sisters, but one that's like full, you know, we have the same father. But we've kind of had to carry that debt, you know, and
Mhm.
transmute that debt. And the only way I could do it was, you know, Iboga. Which is
Right.
hard, but it's like sometimes, you know, like if you've got $100,000 in credit card debt, you have to like take a few jobs. You know,
Yeah,
you gotta make
yeah.
healing your full-time job. So that's essentially, you know, I had to like go for the big guns, you know,
Can you
related to.
clear when you're clearing the trauma in you, can you clear, ancestral trauma, can you
Yeah.
clear it for your family?
Oh yeah. Here's the craziest story. I've only experienced this through my father. I definitely feel like there's been changes in my family that I've seen, but I can't necessarily credit it to working with Iboga. But
Mhm.
one thing I will say is that when my dad tried to commit suicide, he got really sick. He was put into a like he was on disability and he was in this like apartment building that was like, you know, like what do you call it? Like federal housing.
Mhm.
And it was kind of like a rough community. And he said to me, he was like addicted to cocaine and
Wow.
he's like not happy. And he's like, and I'm like, well, what do you want? And he's like, I want to move to an island. And I said, do you know what island you want to move to? And he said, Hawaii. So I bought him a ticket to move to Hawaii and he was able to get off the drugs
Wow.
and, get away from that community, and he
Yeah.
lived in Hawaii for 8 years, but literally for those 8 years, every time I talked to him on the phone, he was on I can't even tell you how many antidepressants, and I'd be like,
Mm.
"Hi, dad, how are you?" I'd be like, "What have you been doing?" And he's like, "Oh, just listening to music."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every single time I talked to him literally for 8 years, all he did was sit in his apartment and listen to music, and he
Yeah.
was a skinny guy, like,
Yeah.
tiny skinny guy. He blew up to, like, 300 and something pounds, I mean, like,
Wow. Yeah.
really, like, overweight, unhealthy, um you know, I went and visited him. I only visited him, like, twice. It was pretty depressing to see him, you
I'll
know, because he
bet.
wasn't in a
Yeah.
great space, but I remember one time he was he had bed bugs in his house,
Oh.
and it was just, like, the conditions that he was living I mean, there's nothing I can do because, you know, what am I gonna do? Anytime I tried to help him, it would just open a channel where he would want more and more and more and more and
Mhm.
more. And
Yeah.
so I just couldn't do that. Like, there were times where I didn't talk to him for, like, a year because, you know, I he wanted me to buy him a van, and I wouldn't he
Mhm.
got in a car accident. He hit somebody without insurance, and
Wow.
so I wanted him to learn a lesson from that, that it's not okay to be driving a car without insurance and hurt another person and
Yeah.
not be able to
Yeah.
pay for it. So, anyway, yeah, so I start doing the iboga and I'm at my fifth initiation now. And this is a few years ago. He calls me up. He says, I lost all the weight. Like
Wow.
yeah, he's not all the weight. He was really skinny. I mean, he's in his 60s. So,
Mhm.
he was really young when he had me. And actually, yeah, I think he's 60. I'm surprised he's alive. I mean, to be honest, like I'm
Yeah.
really with all the stuff that he's been through, I'm surprised he's still alive. So he went off all the medication, lost almost all the weight,
Wow.
and decided to move back to Washington State.
Mhm.
Saved up the money with his, like, $500 a month he gets in
Wow.
disability. I don't know how you do that in this modern world.
Yeah, yeah.
Bought a van. He's a genius. I mean, this is
Mhm.
the sad thing. Like, very brilliant man, like, very incredible artist, but just so much trauma. He built a hydrogen-powered car.
Oh my god.
And so he
That
has
is
a
yeah, that is
hydrogen-powered
huge.
car.
Yeah.
And all of this
Wow.
happened during the time that I
Mhm.
started working with the Ibogaine. I'm like, how does it happen that this guy who's like in an apartment staring at a wall for like
Listening
almost
to
a
music for
decade,
8 years, yeah.
listening to Pink Floyd
Yeah.
and Led Zeppelin and
Yeah.
living in the past, and all of a sudden he just like pops up and builds a hydrogen powered car. And he's still way out there. I mean, he's into some cool stuff now. Like he
Right.
sends me a lot of links, but there isn't that full connection. There's like 20% maybe where I can actually, like, connect in and actually,
Yeah.
like, connect to him, but I
Mhm.
get it. He lives in another world, and even to have that, I think is a huge,
Just the fact that
change.
he lost the weight, got the van, came back to Washington, built a
Mhm.
hydrogen car. I mean,
Yeah.
my god, that's he may be a little different, but he's certainly clear now. Yeah.
It definitely changed some stuff, and then I started to be like, you gotta start doing your work. You gotta do
Mhm.
your inner work. I told him oh, I forgot to tell you one part of the story. I told him that he was a healer. I believe we're
Mm.
all healers. But I said, "You're a healer, you have a gift." And he said that this, like, master, like ascended master started coming to him and, teaching him in,
Wow.
like, his dreams,
Yeah.
and he was, like, healing people with his hands. So he, for the first time, when he built this hydrogen-powered car, he lives in his van, which I think is okay. I mean, he could find a place. I've tried to kind of help him find a place, but I think he's just happier with
In
his
the van,
situation
yeah.
right now. But and essentially he goes around and does healings on people and talks to them about the healing effects of plants. And so, yeah, I
That's
mean,
amazing. What a turnaround, though, and it was
yeah,
really you believe it was you clearing your ancestral baggage, really, your ancestral trauma
I think
that
it
cleared
created
him.
enough
Yeah,
opening. And
yeah.
I have been trying to get him because his sister was murdered. That was one of the
Oh my
things that I
god.
think triggered
Yeah.
his psychotic break, and she came to me, and there was stuff that I needed to clear in the ancestral line, and I had to do a ritual, and I actually tried to get him to do it,
Yeah, yeah.
and he wouldn't do it, and I got kind of mad at him. I'm like, "Man,
Yeah.
like, I'm trying to empower him and, like,
Mhm.
get him to do stuff, um,
We're
but
all here,
wouldn't
come
do it.
on.
But yeah,
Yeah,
trying to get him to the place where he can clear his own stuff so that it's less burden on my other sister
mhm,
because she hasn't quite found the psychedelics yet, and I'm working on her too, but,
yeah, yeah.
hopefully yeah.
Wow, lot of work. You've done quite a bit of work. It's amazing,
So
amazing.
it sometimes it feels like a burden to carry, but then at the same time, like, I'm grateful that I have that capacity.
Yeah, but when you look back, even in your own life, and
Mhm.
how it's changed, and then also how it's impacted your family. That's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
I think the biggest gift is, I have been given I feel like the greatest opportunity of a lifetime to be able to work with these medicines, to have access to
Mhm.
these medicines. A lot of people do not have access to these
Yes.
medicines.
Yeah.
It is a privilege. I mean, to be able to get initiated in this tradition, and
Mhm.
especially with what we as Westerners, me being mixed, coming from Mexico and Canada, and like
Yeah.
my family's from all over. But at the same time, I still acknowledge the history of, colonialism,
Mhm.
and how, that part of my DNA has treated Africa, and,
Yeah.
especially equatorial Africa, and so to, at the same time, be showing up, going to Gabon, and have these just incredible healing masters that have been so generous with teachings, and, really that's why, I mean, on many levels, I started the nonprofit Ancestral Heart, which was really around the idea of that, pretty much all healing is colonialistic. If you go to a spa and you get a Thai massage, if you get a Lomi Lomi massage, these are all ancient healing practices
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
indigenous traditions that have been commodified. And, if you're getting healing, like real healing in any of these traditions always is communal, and it's not a transactional thing where you just say, "Oh, here's $50 for a foot massage, and now we're even Steven." It's like an ongoing relationship where you're like, "How's your community doing? Is there anything you need for support?" And so really, Ancestral Heart is that kind of, container of creating that and kind of repairing our relationship with healing, because the reality is healing doesn't just happen when you take the mushrooms that one
Mhm.
time. It
Yeah.
continues for the rest of your life. And the more that you're in reciprocity, meaning that, you know, you're connected to what the medicine wants you to give back, whether that's on an individual level or supporting an indigenous community, or, supporting your family, whatever it is. But the more that you're in that reciprocity, I feel like it exponentially impacts the healing that comes from the medicine.
Wow. I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah.
That how all those fingers reach out and
Yeah.
stay with you. Yeah.
Forever. I mean,
Yeah.
time doesn't exist. We created it, It's like the healing is happening in this aspect of a place, but there's also the quantum field within that, which is,
That is, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Where
so
everything they're finally starting to say consciousness is everything. Everything
yeah,
is consciousness and
yeah,
everything's connected. Yeah. Do you think that we will ever have use of these kind of plant medicines in the United States?
yes.
That it will become normal?
Yes, the big question is when, where, and how, and that's something I've worked on also very deeply with different state initiatives as well as government initiatives. I worked a little, like, I've been in contact with, like, there was a task force with the Biden administration.
Was there? Yeah.
Uh-huh, and, they didn't make a lot of progress, I remember, like, 3 years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago, they were trying to basically federally legalize cannabis, and they were trying to figure out how they were gonna do that, and that still never came into
Right.
fruition, and I
But
thought
the
it was gonna be,
fact
like,
that
a year,
yeah,
and it
the
would be,
fact
like,
that
done.
they were trying and they were going in that direction is great,
Yeah, but it's
so
it's all the bureaucratic red tape and,
right.
also, like, money and getting reelected and
And power.
interest
There's
and
a lot of
power.
power gets in the way. Yeah.
So I think it's just like, this is a big question that I'm working on for the current administration, and I call myself politically agnostic
Mhm.
because I wanna be able to shape shift and support anyone who wants
Right.
to bring these tools in for healing. And so as my husband and I are approaching this new administration, we're looking at, how can we propose the idea of indigenous wisdom keepers helping to shepherd the process? Because I
Mhm.
think that's an important piece to have the participation of. And if you think about the original Constitution, that was actually inspired by the Iroquois Haudenosaunee Nation. And
Yeah,
the idea of democracy actually came from, from these indigenous knowledge
I
systems.
remember reading that. I remember reading their, um well, they didn't have it written down, this was just their society,
That's how their
and
society is architected.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that it was brought into that it was the basis of our Constitution, how to make it work, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that if you try to write something based on an intellectual idea that you haven't been initiated into the understanding of, you miss a lot of details. That's why you need to have actually indigenous wisdom keepers as part of the stakeholders, as part of the group of advisors, and really at the seat at the head of the table, kind of guiding the process. And then it's like a deep listening of, yes, there's a lot of things like veterans want Abogaine,
Mhm,
but we do not have any kind of reciprocity set up for that. Um, this is indigenous knowledge. This is in biocultural IP that belongs to the Bwiti people who have
mhm,
not been acknowledged. There has not been, and they have signed and demonstrated through the Nagoya Protocol, which is a UN sanctioned declaration that essentially attaches protections to biocultural intellectual property, essentially property rights, that they are declaring that this is their cultural knowledge. And so how do we bring that through and still at the same time honor the indigenous people, because we've just so often just appropriated things and taken
right,
them. And what about the gift of, what they've given us? I mean, the first Iboga that was brought into this country was flown on a private jet and given to Howard Lutzoff, by the Gabonese government. They took their Gabonese private jet back in, I think it was the 1970s, and gave, I think like 20 kilos. I can't remember the exact number, which is what, like 40 pounds or something, of raw iboga to make Ibogaine for research, which
wow,
Howard Lutzoff did the research, but never was that. What happened was the IP ended up going to another woman who ended up selling it to a Thai Life Sciences who is trying to put it through the FDA.
mm,
So never was it acknowledged that this initial gift and this initial
right,
wisdom
right,
came from the Bwiti. And I believe that the spirits of these medicines and these ancestors, the shamans that have been connected to these lineages, will not let psychedelics come into our society until we start to respect and acknowledge their roots.
oh my
And
god, I
we've
hope
seen
we
this
can.
happen. I've seen this happen, and we need it because we're gonna blow ourselves up. I mean, I look at, like what we said at the beginning of the conversation. How are we gonna keep the teens from hurting themselves with
Mhm,
psychedelics if we have them watching a Dare commercial in their
right,
classroom,
right.
you know? There
No
needs
connection at all to the plant,
there needs
yeah,
to be a framework, a foundation laid down, and once that foundation is laid down and it's like teen AA programs that are available in every school. If you have a father, a mother, anyone in addiction, you need support. This is gonna keep you from abusing psychedelics
Mhm.
and alcohol and drugs. We need to have, really great education around all of the aspects of it, dosing, understanding, drug testing, um, and then also, really the market of psychedelics when we look at teens is all illegal market. So if
All
you're a
of it.
teenager,
And that's frightening too because it's getting mixed with other things that are dangerous.
horrible.
Yeah,
No, I
that are
mean, like,
killers. Frankly, they're
you
killers.
watch the news and everyone glorifies ketamine therapy. Ketamine cures depression. You have this like young neurodivergent person, their parents are busy, they're not paying attention to them. They're depressed. They want to cure their depression. They go find a drug dealer to get ketamine. Guess what? A lot of the ketamine on the legal market is laced with other things.
Yeah,
Ketamine,
yeah.
which is an animal tranquilizer that you can get from
I
a
don't know
veterinary
what it
clinic.
is. You
Why are
see it
they
out there, and I don't know what it is.
It's a
Yeah.
prescription. They have had, I know, at least 2 deaths of
Mm,
fentanyl-laced ketamine. What are people
wow.
doing putting fentanyl in
They're
ketamine?
putting it in everything. Yeah, I'm at the point where I say to people, "Don't even take an aspirin from someone else."
Yeah.
Okay. This is killers. This fentanyl, it's a killer, and in search of there's putting it in this is what I was told. They're putting it in the hope that they'll addict people.
Yeah, and that they'll
They'll come
buy
back.
more.
Yeah, yeah. But if they live, because they're not keeping an eye on dosage either. So, and I've known quite a few people who have died thinking they're taking something else, never meant to be taking it. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many hypotheses. I don't wanna get into any conspiracy theories because 'cause I'm like, "Really? You would give people fentanyl to get them hooked so you can make more money?" Because, like,
Mhm.
the reality is, like, I'm sorry, the drug market is huge. People are
Right.
making billions off of cannabis. There's so much money to be made. Everyone wants to do drugs.
Right.
So, you don't need to make
You've
them
got the
addicted.
buyers,
You've
yeah.
got
You've
the
got
buyers.
the but why
You
else would they do it? Why else, would they put it into Xanax or, something like that?
I think, like,
Why
almost
else would they do it?
I think almost like an espionage thing, like, there's a lot of people that talk about how, a lot of fentanyl comes from China, and it might
Mhm,
just be that, these countries are just really pissed off at the US for starting all these proxy wars, and so they're
mm.
just like, "Let's destroy the country from the inside out by, like, poisoning the society."
Except for one thing, we've got the buyers for a lot of these drugs.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I mean, that right there is an issue. But you know
yeah.
what, though? We're coming to the end. We can't because we could go on forever with these conversations. And
Yeah.
I want the audience to know where we can get hold of you and work
Mhm.
with you and what you have coming up.
Oh, well, first off, I loved talking to you. You're so sweet, and
Thank you.
I wanna hear more, like, keep doing your spaghetti dinners
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
mushrooms. I think that's amazing.
Mhm,
And I would say that, you know, I received this book as a clear message in my initiation in 2018. It
mhm.
was my homework but it's not me, and it took me a long time to write it because there's so much complexity and so much bridging
And
of
we
worlds.
haven't mentioned the name, I don't think, Seated Consciousness, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
seeding consciousness, plant medicine, ancestral wisdom, and psychedelic initiation.
Mhm,
And so, this book comes from my 10 years experience working with Iboga, working with other medicines. But most importantly from, really a message that was very clear that this is what needed to be talked about in society in these times, that there's
yeah.
all this demand for psychedelics. We're desperate for healing, but we need a container for this work. But we also need to know how to do the work, like
Yeah.
what's required of us. we already know from the 70s and the 60s that, if you just take a bunch of psychedelics, it can create chaos and it can create a lot of destabilization. And one question I didn't answer before, we were talking about the idea of ego death, how essentially the
Mhm.
kundalini travels through the chakras and essentially you become less and less you and more merging back into the spirit. But the collective ego death that we're experiencing right now is something that is talked about in the Vedic traditions. It's talked about in a lot of indigenous prophecies as well, such as the eagle and condor prophecy, which is that we are receiving information, which is essentially causing a collective ascension. If you look at it from the context of our spiritual orientation, we are in these different yuga cycles, which are, thousands of years cycles of different types of levels of a spiritual um, learning that, like, essentially, goes from being really close to the galactic center, the center of consciousness, to being very far away. So if you look at, like, the ancient times and you look at the ancient texts, there were, like, Buddhists that would live in caves and be completely isolated from humanity and would spend their life reciting mantras to get to
Mhm.
where we can get to here at this point in this lifetime in a very short period of time because we're much closer now than then to the galactic center, to where this is why in this lifetime, in this century that we live in, we have more access to spiritual advancement tools than we've ever had in the history of humanity. You have access to every single psychedelic. Usually in an indigenous culture, you might have access to one or two or three
Right.
that are local to your area. You have access to every healing modality from every country around the world, somatic, um, metaphysical, everything throughout history, new things being birthed, new technologies like
Mhm.
scalar
I never thought
energy
of it that way.
devices.
Yeah.
All of these things are here to support us for this time. We are here to take a giant leap forward as a species, and that's the ego death. And in the death process, we have to acknowledge that it's not the old paradigm, like, Yogananda opened the center of self-realization in the
Mhm.
Pacific Palisades, which essentially created a wave of consciousness through the West Coast of California, throughout the United States, which I believe was the first cycle of consciousness, which led to psychedelic consciousness,
Mhm.
which, was like Ram Dass, Timothy Leary, all those people were doing yoga and spiritual
Yeah.
practices. Then they were taking psychedelics. Then the ayahuasca decides to come out of the jungle and into places like the Hollywood Hills,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and all of those cycles were part of that consciousness. And so now we are moving into this era that's not about self realization anymore. It's not about the individualized enlightenment, which is still very much stuck in the solar plexus chakra, which is like ego related, I related. Now we're
Mhm.
moving into more of this, um, all of us ascending together, all of us being on the ride together, all of us understanding how we are here to help each other and that there is no other.
Yeah.
And so that's the next phase of the journey in the ego death. The ego death is knowing that it's not just about me healing myself, it's about all of us together doing this
I'm
collectively.
so happy to hear that because lately I'm looking out and feeling depressed on where we're going, that we've chosen the dark over the light. So I'm
Yeah.
so happy to hear that.
It's a pendulum swing. Right now, the cycle that we're in between 2024 to 2026 is the darkest piece. It's the
Mhm.
bardo, which in the idea of when you cross from one realm to the other, like in Buddhist tradition, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they talk about the bardos, which is essentially the dark hallway that you
Mhm.
pass through until you get into the other realm. It's the birth canal. So we're in the birth
Wow.
canal right now. We're crossing through. Once we get to the other side, that's where we're going to see all these new technologies that are going to come available to us. We're going to actually have a lot more support, more than what we've been getting right now, in terms of the things that are going to actually help to transform the environment.
Mhm.
But I don't want to get too much into the extraterrestrial piece of it. It's definitely something that comes up in psychedelics.
Yeah.
And not everyone prescribes to it or not, but I will say that, um, you know, we have a kind of like dharmic mission collectively. And part of that dharmic mission is to be stewards of Earth.
Mhm.
We came here, we made a contract that we are here to be caretakers of this planet. And some of us not really even having much connection to having a physical incarnation in a body, some of us having many incarnations in physical bodies. Um, but once we step into that understanding and acknowledgement of becoming stewards of the planet and being stewards of the earth, it's going to unlock something really deep that is like, I mean, I can't even tell you what it's going to be, but it's going to be like a gift more than we could even imagine collectively. And so, on one side of the coin, it may sound really simple, but it's really the premise of the entire book is that we're not doing psychedelics to really step into better stewardship of ourselves, of our planet, of our community, of indigenous wisdom. We're doing it wrong.
Mm. And to do it right, how it you you work directly with people, right? So
Yeah.
how can, they get hold of you to do that?
I mean, I'm not really working directly with people.
Oh, you're not, but you're building the retreat center and you have
Yes.
retreats, yeah.
Yeah, so, we'll have a retreat center, and that's a place that people can go, but I haven't really been doing anything except for writing policy and books
Mhm.
and, building the center, but once the center's open, I would love for people to come, and then there's select people, usually, like, people who need special attention. We'll just put
Yeah.
it that way, that are here and there that are just like, you know
I like
yeah.
the way you put that. People
Yeah.
who need special attention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we've been working really hard developing a program for leaders.
Oh,
My
that's good.
vision
Yeah.
for humanity, and this goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, is that, leaders, anyone leading, should be the
Mhm.
most initiated
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
society. And so, my vision is to take these people through this process and to get as many leaders as possible in the process of being initiated. And I feel like that's what's going to change our society. It's either
Mhm.
priming people that will be the future leaders of the planet, and that includes children, because the children really are, I think, our future more than
Mhm.
anything.
Right.
Um, but also, the current leaders of our planet, the ones that will stay in place, because a lot of them are not gonna stay in
Mhm.
place.
Yeah.
Uh,
You've got your work cut out for you here.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's the vision, and I think Azores is the perfect place because it's neutral territory,
Mhm.
you know? It's a
And it
place.
sounds gorgeous.
It's heaven on earth. I mean, it's like just this just the land is so pure and beautiful, and, yeah, I hope you come visit, and,
I will definitely come visit. I'll
yeah,
bring spaghetti.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I'll bring the spaghetti and the mushroom sauce.
My husband's Italian, he will be
There we go.
so
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. And now I'm
yeah.
worried about it living up to.
Oh, he'll take any Italian food, he
Yeah,
loves it.
good. Good,
Um,
good, good.
Yeah,
Well,
so such an
thanks
honor
so much.
for this
It'd
conversation.
be great. Thanks so much for being on the show too. I know I've gotta let you go. You're out in California. I'm losing light here. Yeah. I know,
Thank
I'm on the
you.
East Coast. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. I would love to have you back because there is so much to talk about.
Oh, I
And
would love to.
yeah, and the vibrations of the all of it, all of it. So, I'd love to have you back on. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you, and, thank you for everyone who is listening. It's such an honor. Like I said, every day I, like, pinch myself that I was chosen to do
Yeah,
this and that
yeah.
I get to learn about all this, and, yeah, it's, like, deep in my heart and, really grateful.
We'll have
And
to
I'm
have
glad.
some tea over at the Grateful Cafe.
Yes, at Cafe
Yeah.
Gratitude.
Oh, that's
Uh
what it is, yeah.
Yeah, Cafe Gratitude, but and it's funny because a lot of podcasts I've been on a lot of podcasts, but not all the people that I've been on podcasts with have actually done psychedelics.
Oh, really?
So it's fun
Yeah.
when I get to
Oh,
talk to
yeah.
somebody who has.
Yeah, and I don't think I've done enough.
More to come.
Yes, definitely. Not done yet. Not done
Mhm.
yet. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're good.